So in the past, I've created all kinds of videos about the bigger factors that are involved with creating fat loss, and even have an entire playlist on my channel. I've given you videos about how to find your maintenance calories, about how to adjust your macros in your cardio, how to lose fat without losing muscle, how to lose that stubborn fat, and everything in between. But what if you're doing everything right and you still can't see results? Well, today I'm going to cover 4 less commonly talked about reasons why you may be stuck and what you can do to reach that next level. The first and arguably most important factor is poor sleep patterns. There are several correlation studies that have shown people who sleep worse tend to be more overweight and much more likely to be obese. One even found that adults who had shorter sleep durations were 55% more likely to become obese, and even more startling is children were 89% more likely. However, the problem with correlation studies is there could be a lot of different compounding variables you need to keep in mind, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. That said, there was a study that looked at combining a caloric restriction with either getting 8.5 hours of sleep or 5.5 hours of sleep, and there were some pretty remarkable differences. It showed those who slept less lost more lean body mass over fat mass, had worse performance and increased hunger, and it created unfavorable nutrient partitioning. In fact, the 5.5 hour group lost 50%, yes, 50% from lean body mass and 50% from fat mass, whereas the 8.5 hour group lost almost all their weight from fat mass. Don't want to lose your gains while you're cutting? Make sure you prioritize sleep. And hey, even if you don't really care about muscle, you still don't want to lose it, because the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolism is going to be, the more calories you're going to burn at rest. And there's some pretty strong correlation between post-diet extreme hunger and loss of lean body mass. And besides that, if you're hungrier when you don't sleep as much, obviously more hunger is not going to help in a fat loss phase. Lower performance is obviously not going to help, because if you're not performing as well, you're not going to get as good of results. Lack of sleep will also increase cortisol levels, and cortisol has many negative side effects, including an anti-fat loss effect. Of course, there's going to be times where you're going to have to sacrifice sleep, and one night here or there isn't going to make any significant difference. But if you're intentionally sacrificing sleep long term, you're in real danger. Now, the second factor to consider is stress, and this of course can also be compounded by lack of sleep. In fact, I've already talked about cortisol and its anti-fat loss properties, and once you know it, cortisol is often called the stress hormone because it does elevate from stress. But here's the thing, all of life's stressors have to be considered here. You don't have different pockets of stress control for things like your job, and then your home life, and your friends, and your training and nutrition, and everything else. It all comes from the same place. And stress comes from both mental and physical stress. And you better believe that exercise is a stress on the body, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And in terms of training, you have to challenge and stress the body for it to change. But if you're chronically stressed in life and you're chronically stressed in the gym, you better believe that your body is going to fight you hard. In fact, it's not uncommon for people to get stuck with their fitness goals because they are constantly overworked. Training 7 days a week, doing an hour of cardio every single day, never taking deloads and backing off on their training. Sometimes you need to take some time off and you need to prioritize recovery, because if your body can't recover properly, it's going to stagnate. And if you're constantly pounding yourself into the ground all the time, there's a good chance that's why you're stuck. Remember that more is not always better. Better is better. And as far as life goes, obviously we can't control all the different stresses and what happens to us. Bad stuff is going to happen to us sometimes, and honestly, the stress that usually happens to us in life is usually stuff that's out of our control. So the best thing you can do to control your stress levels isn't to wish that things wouldn't happen to you in life, it's to manage how you choose to respond to the stresses that happen in your life. For me, I always personally stop and ask myself, is this something I can control? If the answer is yes, well then I have to change my behavior to make that happen. And if the answer is no, well, it's not worth getting worked up over then. I truly believe you can only become as stressed as you let yourself get. The third often overlooked factor is digestion. When your digestion is off, you're not going to properly absorb your nutrients, and it's going to cause a whole cascade of negative effects in the body. It literally impacts everything. In fact, I can say this from experience, as about 2 years ago, I spent a good 6 months just miserable with really bad digestion problems. And sorry if this is TMI, but I think it's important to talk about, and if you're going through something like this, I can promise you that it's having a serious impact. So I basically had diarrhea every single day for like 6 months, and I went through all kinds of tests. They test for things like parasites and different diseases and everything under the sun, and couldn't figure out what was going on with me. And as things persisted, the negative side effects just piled up. I slept worse, my performance suffered as I had no energy. I had no motivation to do anything. My libido dropped. My body composition took a turn for the worse, and I hated my training because everything was so difficult. It just made everything suck. Eventually, I went on something that's called a low FODMAP diet, which is basically a pretty extreme elimination diet, which, to try to simplify what it means, it basically takes out all the foods that are difficult to digest. And I did this for a couple months until most of my symptoms had subsided, and then went through the reintroduction phase to see what triggered me. And this is how I found out I have a gluten intolerance, and ever since removing gluten from my diet, and after a few months of my body trying to heal itself again, I haven't had any problems since. So anyway, if your body is constantly talking to you and you're having a lot of digestion problems, you're gonna wanna dig deeper to figure out what's going on. And don't be that guy who knows that they can't digest things well, but doesn't wanna remove it from their diet and then just continues to suffer over and over. I know it sucks, I get it. It's not fun removing all those foods that you enjoy, but it's worth it to finally feel good and get better results. Now, the fourth overlooked factor, and is the one that I probably struggle with the most, and that's proper hydration. Dehydration is unquestionably going to impact your performance, and there's a lot of different numbers that people throw around out there. Like, I think a common one is for every 1% of dehydration you have, you see a 10% drop in performance. I don't know where these numbers come from or what the actual numbers are, but I can tell you if you're not hydrated properly, your performance is going to suffer. Hydration is also important for proper nutrient absorption, and we just talked about the importance of that before. So again, obviously make sure you're well hydrated. So the million-dollar question is, how much water should you drink? If you look at the RDA, it says about 80 ounces for women and around 120 for men, but it really just depends on how active you are, how much you tend to sweat, where you live, and things like that. But I do typically give the target of around 80 to 120 ounces of water for most people. But basically, you just want to look for your urine to be mostly clear. And of course, if you're thirsty, you should be drinking water. Now, many people will argue over whether it's just water that counts or all fluids. I typically go all fluids. Yes, I understand that things like caffeinated beverages have a bit of a diuretic effect, especially in larger doses. Smaller ones, it's really minimal. But as a whole, all fluids do count and will help hydrate you. And in general, if your pee is clear and you're not thirsty, you're good. And one other way you could look at it too is if you're not peeing very often, if you're going several hours all the time and barely peeing throughout the day, you probably need to drink some more fluids. Or if you're peeing all the time, if you're going like every half hour, well, you're probably drinking a little bit too much then and need to back off. Because believe it or not, yes, you can drink too much water. As always, extremes are pretty much never the answer, and the answer is always somewhere in the middle. And if you're drinking too much, there can be some serious health problems from this, especially if you're not getting enough electrolytes because of it. All right, here's what I want you to do next. If you're getting down to the nitty-gritty and struggling to get that last bit of fat off, then make sure you check out this top video and I'll show you what you need to do to get there. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.